everyone for joining us today for this ORD workshop on forming productive research teams, where we have Dr. Marissa Scheffler from the Department of Psychology, along with Allison Traylor, also from the Department of Psychology, joining us today to discuss this topic. Before we dive into our main topic for today, I'm going to give you a brief overview of the Office of Research Development and the resources that we can provide to you as faculty. So this workshop is being hosted by the Office of Research Development. We're located within the Division of Research here at Clemson. And our goal is to facilitate your research as faculty at Clemson. We do this in three main areas: faculty support, institutional advancement, and exploring new opportunities. The area that is going to be most relevant to you all today is the faculty support, where we provide early career academies, proposal development support and training, nominations for prestigious awards and honors, as well as workshops like today on various topics. To tell you a little bit more about each of these, go to the next slide, Marissa. Thanks. At ORD, we have several resources available to you. We have an archive of the workshops that we've done in the past couple of years on our website. You can find that at the bottom of that link at the bottom of the page. In addition, we support two early career academies. The NSF Career Academy is currently accepting applications. This program is available to junior faculty, associate, assistant professors, and it's led by our own Jane Jacoby, who is in the Office of Research Development. We also provide support for the NIH Accelerator Program, which is a joint collaboration between Prisma Health, Clemson, Furman, and USC in Greenville. Our office manages the R initiatives. These are internal funding programs available to Clemson faculty that provide support for things like pilot funding, travel to various sponsor organizations, and honoraria for external reviews. And lastly, coming soon, we have a proposal repository that we're working on. In this resource, you will find funded and unfunded proposals by Clemson faculty, where you can search by sponsor or mechanism to learn more about how to put together a successful proposal. I want to tell you about our upcoming and recent workshops that we've hosted. Our next workshop is going to be Writing to the Reviewer on December 1st from 10 to noon. It's also going to be held virtually. During this, you will hear from a panel of faculty here at Clemson discussing tips to keep the audience for your proposal in mind as you write it. On the right, you see a list of our recent workshops, including one on demystifying the NIH and NSF organizations, and a half-day workshop on grant writing. All of these are available on that ORD workshop archive on our website. All right, with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Marissa Scheffler.
All right, thank you very much. I'm excited to have a chance to talk to everyone and to be able to share a little bit about what I've been working on, what some things that are near and dear to my heart when it comes to teams and trying to help understand and hopefully help support all the great work that's going on across the university in terms of the different research teams that are currently working on proposals, on funded research, on other long-term research planning. And so I've got kind of a quick agenda here. I also have, as Brian mentioned, Dr. Allison Traylor, who is working with me as postdoctoral fellow. She will be also joining in and giving some of the presentation as well. So again, thanks everyone for joining. So what we're going to do today is we're going to focus on everything related to teams. So we're going to talk about a little bit from the science of teams, kind of what we know. We know that working in research teams can be very difficult. We know that working in any kind of team can be very difficult. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that have been found in what we call the science of teams or science of team science, and the broader teams research that might help out to understand a little bit of the ways in which we can really hone in and focus and improve our teams, talk a little bit about some of the different types of interventions. And then I'm going to spend some time highlighting some of the things that things to consider, things to think about, and especially some recommendations and some tools for putting together effective teams and then starting to build them up so that you can really just hit the ground running and be as effective as possible and as productive as possible as a research team. Even if you are not currently on a research team, these will all still be, I think, very relevant to you now or in the future. And so we will wrap up with some additional recommendations, a few kind of final considerations, and then hopefully, and throughout, please feel free to add any questions you may have. If you have questions, please put them in the chat. If you have any, anything you'd like us to elaborate on, certainly put them in the chat. I can't promise we'll get to everything, but in terms of we get a lot of comments, but we will do our best, and we will certainly follow up with anything if we're unable to address it during the workshop today. So, all right. So, easy thing here. What I want you to do is just think about your most recent collaboration. This could be whatever way you want to think about collaboration, what team you worked in, and just in the chat, please enter the number that best describes that collaboration. Is it that you're lucky nobody got hurt? Was it inefficient and draining, but you made it through, crossed the finish line? Was it really productive, but man, wore you out, relationship-wise, intellectually? Was it great? With that 5 there, I see a couple 5s. Yes, 5s, 3s, good. Maybe it was a lot of fun and you learned a lot and had a lot of enjoyable times working with folks, but maybe less productive than you would have hoped. I think we've got a pretty good mix here so far. So I think that I just kind of want to mention this because just going to get a sense of where folks are at, start thinking about and getting a feel for, have you had some rough collaborations and you're trying to make this kind of make some improvements? Are you already feeling pretty good, but you want to see what you can do to get a little bit better? And any of those, I think there's always room to improve when it comes to teamwork. And so that's really a lot of what, my research and the work I do with Allison and others here at Clemson is that we really focus on trying to unpack and understand and really dig into and figure out kind of how do we start to make our teams more effective? What are the tools or the resources? What's the science behind making teams effective? It may not be something that everybody kind of thinks, oh, I'm great at working in teams. And of course I can collaborate with others. Until you get into the nitty gritty and then things maybe don't go as smoothly as you had hoped. So my whole goal is to try and make that a little bit easier for you by using science to do it. So using good, validated, effective interventions that have actually been proven to work. And so this really kind of all comes down to an overarching question, and whether this is with research teams, whether it's with teams at NASA, teams at hospital, our big question often is really that we tend to look at teamwork as an opportunity to bring together really smart people, experienced folks who have a lot of great knowledge, expertise, wisdom, things that they can really contribute. But just because you put together a lot of folks who are really brilliant, really smart, really great, doesn't mean that they're always going to be able to translate that into working together effectively. And so that's really the kind of the overarching question here. And I think especially this is relevant when we start to talk about research teams, science teams, because unfortunately what we've seen in a lot of the emerging research and work in this area is that we have a lot of need for teams. We have a lot of a push towards working in collaborative, convergent environments, especially with our grant funders wanting that. But unfortunately, these teams can often underperform. So meaning that they're not able to reach their full capacity, their full capabilities. They have lots of great potential, but just might not be able to quite get there. Sometimes it's because there's issues regarding the not having a clear disciplinary direction. It could be that, and sometimes that's because there's so many different disciplines being represented that it's a little bit hard to pull apart and say, okay, kind of who is there a lead here? Is it can we kind of understand how what we're all doing here and how we all fit together? And this also happens sometimes, I think, where the teams get very large. And so when we're talking about trying to tackle big challenges, big societal research challenges, grand challenges, sometimes we go to these bigger teams and we go to these highly interdisciplinary teams. And again, it's the case of we might have all the right people, but unfortunately, it's just not working out quite right. And so what are some of the reasons for that? Well, we've seen issues, and these are probably all things, so feel free to chime in here if you've experienced other issues that you in your own research teams. This would be something that feel free to put in the chat if there's anything that you would really like to tackle today or want us to talk about today. But I wanted to mention these are kind of some of the big challenges that that we especially see coming up in interdisciplinary research teams, proposal teams, as you're putting the project ideas together, and or maybe once you get that proposal funded, then kind of how do you actually make the teamwork happen effectively? And some of the things that that drive the challenges and issues that we see here are it may be things like having different expectations, different tenure promotion requirements, different kind of approaches or identities ourselves. So it's great to bring together these very diverse groups, but then you've got a very diverse group. And so you have to think about the ways in which we may need to really focus on the teamwork aspect to see how we can improve how we're coordinating, cooperating, working together. And so I'm actually now going to kind of let Allison take over here for a little bit and talk to you a little bit about kind of some of the foundational work that has happened and kind of some of the key things we know, because while working in teams is very challenging, especially in these types of research environments. And yes, increasingly, as we're working across different institutions and having different, the need to bring in folks from all over the world, there's a lot of challenges, but there's also a lot of great research out there. So, so Allison, let's just let me know if you just want to do next slide or if you're ready for me to jump on in, but I will you can go ahead and
that sounds great. So in response to this kind of increasing demand to understand how teams work, not just research teams, but teams across a wide variety of industries, there's been a lot of work done by team scientists from a lot of different disciplines to kind of distill what we know about or what we could understand about how teams function and kind of the basic core principles of what makes a team effective. And so I'm going to be sharing with you today, first, a few kind of key observations about what makes an effective team. And then I'll kind of dig a little bit deeper into what some of these things mean and other ways to think about what kind of principles underlie effective teamwork. So we want we know that effective teams have clear roles and responsibilities. So in effective teams, we know what we are contributing to the team, and we have a general idea of what our teammates are kind of focused on and what their responsibilities are. So there's not confusion over who's doing what on the team or who brings what to the table. Effective teams are also driven by a compelling purpose. So you have a clear, shared, strong goal in mind. And so with research projects, that's maybe putting together a grant proposal around a specific topic or kind of building out ideas together around a specific topic. But everyone kind of has a shared understanding of that goal and feels compelled by it as well. Effective teams have leaders who kind of promote the team, help kind of coach and provide feedback to the team to make it better over time. A leader doesn't have to be someone who is formally assigned to be a leader. It can just be someone who kind of displays leadership qualities or consistently steps up on the team to take that role on. We know that effective teams have psychological safety. So psychological safety, the definition is that it's a team is safe for interpersonal risk taking. And what that means is that you feel free to kind of share your ideas. You feel free to disagree with each other about how to or about maybe the answer to a problem or the right solution. And you're able to kind of freely talk and share your ideas. You don't feel like you will be kind of judged or criticized for speaking up on the team. And then effective teams also develop team norms. So again, kind of this idea that people or that teammates have a shared understanding of kind of what the expectations are on the team. We can flip to the next. Effective teams also, and this kind of follows a similar theme as well, kind of share or have a shared mental model. So people are on the same page about the goals, about what everybody's working on. Not only do they have kind of an idea of what they're doing on the team, they have an idea of how everyone kind of plays into the team's ultimate goal, and they have a shared understanding of the goal. So it's not just, oh, am I inspired by what I think the goal of the team is, but it's, do we all have kind of an idea, the same idea about what this team is trying to accomplish? Effective teams self-correct. So they take time to sit down and say, you know, after a deadline has passed, they say, they take time to sit down and say, what did we do well? What could we do better for the next, when we're working toward the next deadline? Kind of taking that time to explicitly debrief or maybe take a pause in their work and say, wait a second, is this how we want to do this? Or do we want to shift how we're thinking about approaching this problem? Effective teams also set expectations about performance, about, you know, this is how we're going to communicate about when we are behind on our tasks. This is how this is when we're going to meet and how often we're going to meet. These are our expectations for each other in terms of performance and what everyone's contributing to the team. Effective teams share unique information. So humans have the tendency to want to talk about what we have in common, or to talk about the information that we share, or the kind of ideas that we have in common. But effective teams are really good at sharing unique information and making sure that they're directing their discussions, decision-making, to make sure that they're capturing kind of a lot of different perspectives. So on an interdisciplinary team, you know, there might be one social scientist and a sea of engineers on the team. And we're focused on what we all know about engineering because we all have a little bit of that in common, but we're kind of missing out on the expertise of the social scientist if we're not explicitly making sure that we're talking about what they uniquely have to share with the team. And then finally, effective teams are supported by optimal conditions. So this gets at some of the challenges that Dr. Scheffler talked about a minute ago around kind of barriers to effective teamwork. So things like rewarding in the promotional and tenure process, rewarding individual outcomes rather than team-based outcomes, or rewarding kind of disciplinary contributions rather than interdisciplinary ones. These are types of conditions that can either facilitate or hinder interdisciplinary teamwork in particular. We can move on to the next slide. So next, I'm going to kind of dig into these a little bit deeper. So, and there we go. And so before I kind of dig in deeper, I want to start by explicitly mentioning that not all teams are created equally. And so as I go through these different kind of drivers of team effectiveness, know that in some teams, these things matter more than others. And the sticking point or the kind of factor that influences how much, you know, effective communication, shared mental models, psychological safety matter in a team is the degree of task interdependence. So that's how we distinguish in team science between a group and a team. So if you have a group of people who are technically kind of working in the same area, but they're all working independently and they're all kind of able to get their work done without relying on each other for different parts of their work. That would be a low interdependence team, or we might even consider that a group rather than a team, and kind of make that distinction. Where we really see these principles and fundamentals of teamwork coming into play are higher interdependence teams. So this is when, you need the work of X person and Y person and Z person to get your part of it done, or it's not going to get done without a back and forth interaction between team members. So interdependent, that's something to kind of think about as you're working with a team. And in fact, you want there to be a higher level of interdependence to kind of gain or reap the reward of a team, but that also brings kind of greater challenges. We can go to the next slide. And so we know that kind of another way to distill some of the big findings in team science are what we call the 7 C's of teamwork. And so these are capability. Do we have the right people with the right mix of knowledge, skills, and abilities on the team? Cooperation, which has to do with team members' attitudes and willingness to learn. Coordination, which has to do with the behaviors that we're using to coordinate our actions toward achieving our goals. Communication, which has to do with, are we communicating kind of unique information with each other? Are we communicating effectively, both within the team and with kind of external stakeholders? Cognition, which has to do with these like I talked about, shared mental models, or this kind of shared understanding of the team and its priorities and everyone's roles on the team. Coaching, which is about kind of the leader and the leadership behaviors that are demonstrated on the team, whether by a formal designated leader or by someone who kind of takes on that role informally. And then conditions. And so this is what I talked about kind of with, for example, tenure and promotion expectations in organizations, a lot of kind of performance metrics. We want to be rewarding teamwork rather than, and kind of providing resources for teamwork rather than individuals. We can move on to the next slide. So next I'm kind of going to dig in a little bit deeper for each of these 7 C's. So what we know about teams is that individual competence matters. So a team of experts does not make an expert team, but you need experts to make an expert team. So you need that kind of basic level of knowledge, skills, and abilities to perform effectively, but just having a bunch of superstars working together doesn't mean that your team will have an effective outcome. So probably a lot of us have been a part of teams before that, you start out working together and you're really excited about it because you're working with all these really impressive people who have really strong CVs and just kind of impressive bodies of work and knowledge that they've accumulated. But then it doesn't mesh well. There's not effective teamwork. And so you end up kind of not reaping any reward from that expertise. So what we know is that and we also know that kind of adding a bunch of superstars isn't necessarily going to achieve great success. And it can actually hurt performance, especially if there are egos involved, and if there are kind of intergroup standing issues, if there's conflict that's related to people's status or egos on the team. And part of this has to do with, or can be influenced by who the teammates are and kind of what conditions we have in place. So what we're rewarding in the team. So again, here you want to think about creating conditions for your research teams or in your lab, for example, where you're rewarding teamwork and rewarding people for working effectively together and not just for their own individual performance. So next, moving on to cooperation. So cooperation, again, is about kind of the attitudes that are required for effective teamwork. And so one of these attitudes or one of the really important attitudes that's essential for teamwork is collective orientation. So someone who has a collective orientation, likes being on a team, And it's the kind of person that is willing to put the team's success above their own success. So, if they realize that their contribution to the project is maybe better kind of in the background than at the forefront, they're willing to kind of step back so that the team can have the best overall product instead of just making sure that they shine on the team. Collective orientation is also, we know, related to team performance. So the more team members that are high in collective orientation, the better the team performs and the kind of more effective interactions team members have with each other. And you need to have enough team players on the team. So you can't just have a bunch of people who are individually focused and one person who's collectively oriented to bring everybody together. You need enough people on the team who kind of have that team mindset. And it's important to note that it doesn't have to be an either or. It's not, I won't be individually successful if I'm putting the team first. We actually find that people who are willing to kind of put their team first and be effective collaborators end up being top performers a lot of the time, because they are kind of raising up the people around them as well. So next, another kind of attitude that's important for team cooperation is collective efficacy. So this is the shared belief that the team will be successful. And it sounds kind of wild that just simply believing that your team will be successful working together leads to better performance, but that is what we find over and over again. And meta-analyses as well provide strong indication that the more that team members believe they will succeed, the more they tend to. And we also find that, and this kind of relates to what I talked about at the beginning, that sliding scale of interdependence. So when we don't rely, when our team is less interdependent, when we're not relying on each other as much, self-efficacy, which is kind of your belief that you will be successful at completing a task, is more important than collective efficacy. But when we have these high interdependence teams, like a lot of these research teams that you all are working on, we really want people to believe that their team will be successful. And so a tip, a recommendation for improving collective efficacy is to take the time to talk about successes or celebrate the team's wins. So that can kind of make the team feel or brings attention to the fact that the team is doing well and makes team members think more positively about how well they're doing. And so it's important to take time to give critical feedback and think about how can we improve, but it's also very important that we take the time to discuss and celebrate when we have successes. And then the kind of final attitude that I'm going to talk about today is psychological safety. So I talked about this a little bit earlier, but it's the belief that a team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. And so this a lot of times has to do with kind of speaking up when you see someone making an error and feeling comfortable doing so, sharing your ideas, disagreeing with a team member. This is especially important, it's especially important that people feel comfortable disagreeing with the team leader, or that they feel psychologically safe with the team leader. And we know that psychological safety improves both team performance and team learning. And that's because teams that are psychologically safe, members are more likely to share, oh, I almost made a big mistake. Let me tell you all about it so you can avoid making the same one. Or, saying, I think we could do this differently next time and do it better. Or I think that we maybe didn't work super effectively together on that last project, but maybe on this next project, we can do things differently. So teams that are comfortable having those conversations are better at learning. Next up, getting into coordination. So coordination is about the behaviors that drive team performance. So cooperation was attitudes, coordination is behaviors. And once again, the more interdependent teams are, the more important these behaviors are for performance. And so team researchers think about team behavioral processes in kind of three different groups. So we think about transition processes. These are what happen when you are between goals or between projects working with your team. So maybe you met the kind of initial deadline for a grant funding opportunity, but you have a full proposal that you now need to prepare. And so this transition time is when you'll engage in behaviors like reflecting on how the initial proposal went, and kind of planning how you can do better or how you can work together more effectively for the full proposal submission. Action processes are things that we do when we are in the middle of pursuing a goal. So once you start working on that full grant proposal, are we providing people with backup? Are we paying attention and monitoring? Not to provide too much oversight to our team members, but to be able to say, hey, you look like you could use some help on this. Like, what can I do to support you? Or, hey, so-and-so seems to have way more of this workload than the rest of us do. What can we do to reallocate responsibilities so that we're all, so that we can all make sure that we meet our deadline? And then we have interpersonal processes, and interpersonal processes occur throughout a team's time working together so that they can occur during the transition or action phases. And these are things like conflict management, which I'll talk about a little bit more, and motivation. So are we kind of cheering each other on? Are we making sure that we are maintaining kind of positive relationships amongst team members? So if we go to the next slide, kind of getting into what I want to talk a little bit more about conflict, because this one comes up a lot, and it comes up in good and not so good ways in teams. And the important way or the kind of important takeaway with conflict is that not all conflict is created equal, and there are different types of conflict that teams face. And so we have task conflict, which is, we disagree about maybe the solution to a problem, or I think that we should focus our grant proposal on this topic, and I think we should focus it on this slightly different topic. Relationship conflict is when we don't like each other. So we perceive, I don't like your personality. I don't like your attitude. I don't like you as a person, or we have some history with each other that is unrelated to work, but that is seeping into how we're thinking about each other on this team. And then we have process conflict. So this is maybe you have one person on the team who is a procrastinator and one person on a team who likes to have everything done way far in advance. And those people are going to have conflict because they like to get things done differently. And so process conflict is another, is kind of the third type of conflict that we see. And the way that we think about conflict is that relationship conflict and also to some extent process conflict tend to be bad for teams, but task conflict can be good. And so the next slide kind of unpacks those findings. So there was some recent research done by one of our colleagues on engineering teams looking at what made conflict kind of helpful or hurtful. So prior to this, there were conflicting findings in the team conflict literature about what was going on with team conflict. And what this research found was that it looked at profiles of conflict in teams. And what it found was that teams that are high only in task conflict, so they are, debating a lot of their ideas, going back and forth on the best solution to this problem or the best prototype for this project, those teams perform the best. So those are the teams that are high in task conflict, but low in relationship and process conflict. The teams that were high in both relationship and task conflict perform the worst. And so think about maybe a time working on a team, or even maybe in your personal life or something like that, where you're working on something that is together that is task focused, but you don't like the person or you're mad at them for some other reason, and then everything they do or everything they say, even related to this work or this task, is bothering you, and you cannot separate those two, that kind of being frustrated with them or that relationship conflict from the task conflict, that's when we see real issues with conflict in teams. So it's really important to be aware that not all conflict is bad, but just think about where that conflict is stemming from. So next we have, or the next C, kind of underlying effective teamwork, is communication. So I talked a little bit about this one at the beginning, but what we know about team communication is that information sharing is vital to team success, and that the quality of communication matters more than the quantity of communication. And so we sometimes talk about this as like the quiet kitchen phenomenon. So if you've ever been to one of those restaurants that has an open kitchen where you can see everybody working together, a lot of times you'll notice that, or if you pay attention to it, you'll notice that there's not a lot of chit-chat going or chit-chatting going on. Or if there is, it's not about what they're doing. They don't have to, they only, or they're not kind of just sharing information or just talking for the sake of talking doesn't improve team performance. It's when we speak up at key moments or when we have new information or things like that that determine how well a team performs. So making sure that you're sharing unique information and then engaging in closed loop communication. So that is when you receive an email from someone that says, you know, I'm going to be working on this, responding and saying, that sounds great. It sounds like you're going to be working on that, kind of reframing what someone's saying. And then that person responding and confirming that you're kind of reframing or rephrasing what they said is correct. So that back and forth, taking that just a little bit of time to go back and forth helps ensure that we're on the same page. Another thing to be aware of with team communication is that people tend to assume that other people on the team know things. So we might see something from my perspective seems obvious, but from another team member's perspective, it might not even have occurred to them. So make sure, especially in a team where you think you might have unique information or a unique perspective, that you are explicitly kind of sharing that unique perspective and not just assuming that other people are seeing things in the same way that you are. It's also especially important in hierarchical teams. So again, this psychological safety that I talked about a little bit ago is really key to encourage speaking up and encourage kind of unique information sharing in teams. And then this last bullet is kind of what I was talking about with the quiet kitchen. So in high performing teams, less is more in terms of communication. Once you kind of get in sync with each other and have a really robust and strong shared mental model, you don't need to communicate as much, and you don't need to talk just or just for the sake of talking to kind of improve your decision making or improve your team's outcomes. So the next C is cognition. And so one of the kind of big things that we talk about with team cognition is shared mental models. So again, this is, are we on the same page? And shared mental models are consistently related to better team performance, especially in teams where there's a lot of coordination required, or again, where there's a lot of interdependence on the team. You need to have a shared mental model about the task. So what you're working on, what everyone's doing, what we're going to do if we face this particular common challenge, how we're going to check in if we need to change our course of action, what our vision or goals for the team are, what everyone's roles on the team are, what the priorities of the team are, all those things you need to kind of have a shared understanding of. And again, this is how teams are implicitly coordinating. This is how you have a quiet kitchen. This is how basketball teams can can kind of blind pass and anticipate what someone else is on the team is going to do. I wish I had a football analogy, but I don't off the top of my head. And this is how in the operating room too, where you have the scrub tech who has the scalpel ready before the surgeon requests it. So they've done the procedure enough times together, and they worked with this surgeon enough times that they don't have to wait for the surgeon to say, hey, hand me the scalpel, before they have it ready to go for them. So shared mental models are kind of underlie a lot of different team processes, but they don't automatically develop. And I think a lot of times people feel like they will, or assume that as we just work together over time, we'll kind of get the hang of it, and we don't need to do all these check-ins and all these debriefs and all these huddles. But what we actually find is that as teamwork becomes more complex, so typically as teams are working together more over time, shared mental models actually tend to degrade. So it gets harder to maintain a shared mental model. And team interventions like a team charter, which I'll talk about in a minute, or debriefing and kind of effectively transitioning between projects or goals, and engaging explicitly in that kind of reflection process can help build your shared mental models. So next we have team coaching. And so this is about the leader of a team. And so is the leader of the team kind of focused on, do they have the team in mind? Are they focused on helping the team define their goals and kind of how they're directing their energy and for organizing the work and the task flow of the team and delegating tasks out? And it's important. The big thing here is to remember that a coach or a team coach or a team leader doesn't have to be someone who is formally assigned. So it doesn't have to be your boss. It can be a team member who emerges as a leader. So who is, kind of consistently takes on that big picture with the project and who is really driving things forward. Or teams can share leadership responsibilities. So you might have someone who is really kind of organized at project planning, and they might step up when you're at that phase of the project. And then you have someone else who's really good at saying, you know what, let's pause and talk about how we're doing this and maybe reorganize our workflow or work structure because something's not working or a challenge came up. And so it's okay and even can be beneficial for teams to share some of those leadership responsibilities. And then finally, we have conditions. And I've already talked about conditions a little bit, but once again, these are kind of the things that are in our environment that help facilitate or that unfortunately can inhibit team performance. So things like rewarding individuals over teams, not providing the resources that teams need to communicate with each other or to kind of engage with each other. And what teamwork actions at the top. So kind of when the bosses are effectively teaming together, that can kind of trickle down into the organization and kind of create some of those conditions as well, kind of modeling effective teamwork for the rest of the organization. So how do we create these conditions for effective teamwork? There are a few different ways that we think about doing it. So you want to make sure that you have that baseline individual expertise on your team. So like I mentioned, a team of experts does not make an expert team, but you can't have an expert team without experts. So making sure that you have that base level of kind of capabilities in your team members that you need to achieve whatever the team's goal is. Then making sure that a team is actually needed to get this work done. So I think a lot of times, and we see this in the classroom a lot as well, you might assign a group project just because you feel like you need to assign a group project, but it was once an individual project that people got done individually, and there's not really a component of kind of interdependence. So really being explicit about thinking about, do we need a team to achieve this goal? And then kind of keeping a holistic team focus. So thinking about ways to, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, but thinking about ways to improve how the team is interacting together and teamwork processes, and working on building team members' teamwork competencies. So not just their individual expertise, but what they know about how to effectively work together. So we have a lot of kind of well-researched team development interventions that we know can improve team performance. Some of them are more effective than others. So team training is kind of, it's definitely the most common team development intervention that you see in organizations. It has kind of the most, it's been one of the most studied team development interventions, so we know that training people on these teamwork skills that we've talked about, or that we're talking about today, improves team performance. We also have tools. So team training is something that typically takes a longer amount of time to conduct and work with a team on. But we have other types of tools that are a little bit less resource intensive to implement, but they can also have a big impact on team performance. So these are things like team charters, which I'll talk about in a minute, that are how we kind of at the beginning or at the outset of a project, clarify our goals and kind of get on the same page with each other. Team debriefs. So this is a time for explicitly saying, reflecting on how our last project together went, and plan and figuring out what takeaways we have for what we could do better next time and what we should keep doing next time, and what we've learned from working together on that particular project. Team coaching, which is that kind of outside perspective, and it can be from a leader or an external stakeholder of some sort, where it's kind of feedback on how the team is working together from an external perspective. And then team building. So this is, I would say, maybe this is the most commonly seen in organizations, but team building tends to be, the idea is that you're focused on improving interpersonal processes in teams, but we do see a lot of things that aren't really team building being labeled as team building. So simply going on a scavenger hunt with a bunch of people, like it might be fun, but you're not really building teaming skills. So definitely being that's one to maybe be a little bit wary of in terms of its actual impact on your team outcomes. And when we think about how do we actually kind of develop effective team or how do we actually engage in effective team development interventions, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. So we talked a little bit about how teams have kind of cycles of working together. So you either have interim goals that you're meeting, or you have different projects that you're working on with a team. So you kind of have a beginning and a middle and an end of the project, and then the beginning, middle, and end of another one. And all teams kind of experience that type of cycle. And there are different types of interventions that should be aimed at different parts of the cycle. So for example, a team charter is most effective when you first start working together, whereas a team debrief is effective after you've wrapped up maybe meeting a goal or something like that. Then you have other types of interventions that kind of pop up depending on what's happening in the team. But it's important to kind of recognize that not all interventions are necessary in all teams. So for example, a team conflict management intervention of some sort is not relevant for a team that's not experiencing conflict. And this kind of picture over here, I think it went viral kind of at the beginning of the pandemic, where all healthcare workers were wearing so much PPE that you couldn't recognize them. And so they came up with this workaround of putting their name and their kind of unit on their scrub caps. And this is a really simple team development intervention that helped us with our shared mental models and with our kind of clarifying roles and responsibilities, even when you couldn't see who you were working with. And so that's an example even of a clever kind of unique team development intervention that improved teamwork, but that was very specific to these teams and their context. So really quick, I'm going to talk a little bit about team charters as one specific type of intervention that you can probably implement in your research teams. And so here on the side or on the right, we see one example of a team charter. And the idea here is that you are outlining what your team's purpose and goals are, how long you expect to be working together, who is on the team, what are everyone's roles on the team, what are the resources that the team has? What are our plans for communicating with each other? What are the deadlines and deliverables that we're working toward? And these things might seem obvious, or as you're going through a team charter, you might think everybody kind of knows this. Do we need to talk about it explicitly, or do we need to write it down? But what we find is that yes, we do need to actually talk about these things explicitly. And that's how you build a shared mental model and how you kind of ensure that your team will be effective. So a team charter is a document, or is kind of the definition of it is that it's a document that's created by the team. So it's everyone working together. It's not the team leader filling it out and telling everyone this is our team charter, that clarifies the team's direction, notes roles and responsibilities, creates norms for communication, some of the things that I just talked about. It includes, if we go to the next slide, it includes things like the names of the team members, everyone's roles, relationships between different team members, expectations around sharing information, how often we're meeting, what we're going to meet about, that sort of thing. And teams should, when should teams use a charter? So like I mentioned before, teams should really think about implementing a charter as soon as they start working together. So this isn't, if you think you could use a charter and you've started working together, it's not necessarily a bad idea to use one. But when you really want to think about this is when you're starting to work on a new project together, or when you're starting to work with a new team of people. So maybe you have your first meeting together for a big grant proposal that's coming up, and that's when you would want to do or work on your team charter together. And then why are team charters important? So I've talked about this a little bit too, but this is how we get our shared mental model. This is how we kind of formulate our goals, figure out who is best suited to do what, determine who has the expertise where and this and that, and how we can kind of most effectively use our knowledge, skills, and abilities to have the best outcome possible for the team. And then it's also an opportunity for teams to familiarize themselves with each other. So a lot of times you're working with maybe some people that you've worked with before, but a few new people. And it's a good idea to kind of take this as an opportunity to let people share what their expertise is in and what they kind of bring to the table as well. And what we find is that teams that use team charters and have these explicit conversations have perform better and are more satisfied with their teams. And so I'm going to share in the chat box really quick. There's a website that ITP Metrics that has a lot of useful team resources, but this is their example of a team contract that you all are welcome to download and use in your own teams, or use it for inspiration for your own teams. But it just kind of gives you a tangible example of what a team charter looks like. So you're welcome to take a moment to look over that. And then Dr. Scheffler is going to get into effective beginnings for teams.
Thank you very much, Dr. Traylor. I think that gave us all a nice overview. I know it's a lot of information that we're handing out to you here. So one of the reasons why we wanted to go ahead and get you starting to think about the team charter is that pretty much the things I'm going to talk about next related to kind of getting your research teams, proposal teams, whatever they may be, up and running off the ground, will be things that you can incorporate, think about, do. They're all going to be kind of relevant to this idea of putting together a team charter. As Allison mentioned, there are many, many different types of interventions. I think that probably if we can get more teams working, and especially research teams where things can sometimes be very nebulous, or we may think, oh well, we've got we've got the proposal, once the proposal is submitted, it's done, and we think that we have everything kind of clarified in that. But then, if you get funded, then sometimes you come back and realize, oh, wait, we didn't really clarify some of these things as much as we thought we did. Or we did a really good job of clarifying our tasks, but not some of the in the weeds specifics about how we're going to actually make those tasks happen. So what I want to spend kind of the rest of our time here today is really just picking apart a few of these things that I think would be things you could feed into the team charter. So with Allison, I shared that, and I'll actually kind of give another moment in a little while, just where if you have any questions or things that after I kind of go through these compositional and kind of putting your teams together and think about, okay, how are they going to actually get along and socialize a little bit and deal with any kind of conflicts that are coming up. We can do a little bit of reflecting on, okay, is there anything that you still might have maybe some questions about? And I'd like for everybody to think about, as we walk through this, think about any team that you are on right now, whether it's a research team or not, whether it's a proposal team or whatnot. Even though it is best to start a team charter at the beginning of the project, the beginning of the team coming together, you can implement a team charter at any point in time. And sometimes that may be the way to save you from a lot of other conflicts or issues or problems down the road. So just kind of want to throw that out there too. Don't think that, oh, well, I'm not joining any new teams anytime soon, so this isn't relevant. As I'm walking through kind of these next kind of pieces here, think about, do you have these things clarified? Do you have a good handle on this? And is everybody on the same page in your team? And if not, then maybe think about, okay, would this type of document, especially as a living document, so not just okay, we did it, it's done, we're finished, but something that you could revisit and bring back as needed. That's really, I think, one of the biggest benefits of these types of charters and documentations. And again, sometimes it seems a little bit like, well, of course, everyone knows this, but we also know that from lots of research on teams and communication that we don't always know what everyone thinks we know. So I think that this hopefully will be some additional kind of digging a little bit more deeply into some of these factors that will come up in the team charters. So first, I'm going to talk a little bit about just thinking about how do we put together our teams. Who is it that when you have a research idea or you have something where you need some collaborators, just think to yourselves right now a little bit. What is it that makes you kind of recognize and say, oh, either this is somebody I think would be a great fit, and so I'm going to go try and recruit them, or what is it that as I'm working with someone over time, it starts kind of emerges that, oh wow, they're a really, really great person to collaborate with and work with. So just think about that a little bit. Is it do you tend to find collaborators by working with your friends, people you already know, so kind of staying in your comfort zone maybe a little bit? Do you tend to specifically just kind of reach out for, oh, well, I need someone who has a background in psychology or automotive manufacturing or something like that? So what are some of the factors that are coming to play? Feel free, if anybody has great ways that you're doing this and you want to share, feel free to drop those in the chat, but otherwise just kind of think to yourself a little bit. And hopefully there's several things that probably come to mind. Also maybe making sure that you have folks who are actually going to follow through, do the things that they've been assigned to do. And there may be times where you have to work with someone that maybe it wasn't your choice, but maybe you were not the one who's leading the team. So and so that can be maybe a great working relationship over time. Now, it may be a little bit easier to think sometimes too of the folks who, wow, you've had some just not great experiences with them. What is it that might make someone feel like just not a great group member, not somebody that you'd want to work with again? So somebody that you hope kind of forgets, your email address or where your office is or whatnot. So what is it that kind of, how do you kind of see those distinctions? Think about that for a minute. Because when we think about putting together research teams and other teams, there are many different ways we can do it. We can go and just pull the folks that we already know and that we know their strengths, their weaknesses, and everything, and that's one way to do it. There are also some other ways that we may just look for folks with expertise. So these are just kind of some ways that we've seen kind of come out in the team's research, because composition is a big issue, a big question. It's not just a research issue, it's across all types of organizations, trying to figure out how you get that right fit, because oftentimes what makes people stay or leave an organization, a collaboration, are the people they're working with. It may not even have to be the work itself, it's who they're having to do the work with. And so we tend, though, to sometimes think about the individual contributions of each member without kind of thinking about how that's all going to fit together. So kind of having that individual focus, I'm going to go find this person who can do this task and this person who can do that task, without thinking about, well, those are two interdependent tasks and those people will need to work together. And can they work together? Will they be able to work together? Do we want to think about, maybe it's not so much that we need a lot of specialization, but that we need everybody to at least have some level of pulling their weight or being able to contribute something. So thinking about if we have someone who's going to be really central and key to our project, but they're not very cooperative, then that's going to potentially set us up for maybe some challenges, because their contribution may not be as great as it could otherwise be if they're not kind of cooperating and supporting the whole team. We can sometimes think about, and this is one place where having folks do team training programs and that kind of thing can be beneficial, is to kind of develop some develop their skills in what we call kind of team generic, good teamwork skills. So being willing to cooperate with others and want to actually work with other people. Having kind of a level of those things kind of gives us yes, we're looking at the individuals who are in that team, but we are kind of paying some attention to the fact that teamwork matters, and that they're overall all together, they're going to have to be effective and have to work together. And we can also think about kind of and this may be something that kind of comes up sometimes a little bit more in maybe in our ideal research teams where things are just maybe working really great, is that we have kind of some distributions. So we call kind of like a profile approach of, we have folks who may have a lot of diversity in their backgrounds and their disciplines and skills they are bringing in, but maybe also some diversity in their teamwork strengths and contributions. And so having a mix of folks who are really great at what they do, but also really willing to just dive in and help solve problems and help meet those last minute requests and needs and things can really make the overall team work well together. So when we're thinking about, and I know this is also sometimes a lot to think about with as a PI, as a co-I, I think sometimes it's easy to think, oh, well, I just need to get somebody who's in this area of expertise and can do this level of work. But being able to think a little bit more about, okay, what's going to make them a good team member? What are some of the attributes or things that might make them a good team member? And maybe it's not just thinking about just the PI co-I teams. It's there are a lot of other folks who are involved in a research project, and so kind of, is there a teamwork component that needs to be considered, taken into account, selected for, or trained in postdocs and undergrads and in other folks who are contributing, lab coordinators that might be contributing to the project. And that's kind of in this more kind of like having this more team focused approach, just kind of looking more at a team model when we think about composing our teams. So so what we want to think about here is really just that when, like I said, as you're thinking about kind of the people that you're pulling together, and bring together a team, bring together lots of great expertise. It's wonderful. But you also want to think a little bit about, and it may take doing some kind of different, starting out small with with a small project with a group before committing to a bigger project, to ensure that you're going to have some of this teamwork compatibility, that you've got kind of the needs met, or that you can reach out to someone who can maybe contribute to the team, maybe even more for their teamwork than anything else, because there are different models, kind of different approaches to think about this, and there may be others that I know there are others that are out there that folks are familiar with. I know things like Myers-Briggs and that type of thing can often get pulled in and used for potentially putting teams together. But two things that I would challenge everyone to think a little bit more about and try to kind of take into consideration and look into above and beyond some of the more practitioner friendly but less evidence-based models out there would be to look at what we call kind of the big five of personality. So extroversion, openness, agreeableness, consciousness, and emotional stability or neuroticism. So this is a pretty tried and true set of personality traits that pretty consistently can predict so being agreeable, having a level of being open. Those are things that you're going to want to look for in your in especially good team members. These are things that you can measure, capture, understand about your team members. They're going to be consistent traits, kind of consistent characteristics, where you may want to use something like this to help you decide, okay, are we missing anything? So if we don't have a really conscientious person on our team, maybe we need to go find one, because that's the person who's going to make sure that all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed and everything. You can also think about kind of folks' preferences and tendencies to go into different roles. There's been tons of work that's been out there, been done on looking at team roles, and this is one that's called the TRIO model, which is one of the newer models that's kind of a pulling together from different areas, and a lot of different work that's been done in the past to kind of say, these are kind of 6 roles that we see pretty consistently across teams in terms of having folks who are going to help with organizing and kind of being innovative and being willing to connect other people, maybe doing some challenging, having a balance, a mix of these, depending on kind of what your task is, what your goals are with a research project or that kind of thing. If you're really trying to push a lot of innovation and think outside the box, having someone who's in that challenger role and wants to be in it, not that you're forcing someone in it, but that's maybe their natural tendency, can be really beneficial. It can also bog you down if you have everyone on the team being in the challenger role all the time, and you're never going to get to agree on anything. So again, I know that these are kind of a lot of different moving pieces to think about. But these are things that even just being able to kind of capture folks' preferences for, kind of attitudes towards, or just what is it that you tend to like to do in a team, and incorporating that into a charter, incorporating that into some of that, even if it's just initial meetings, discussions, kind of conversations, things like that. Getting that, not just I'm going to contribute to this project as an expert in whatever field that I am bringing to the table, but that I also, love being able to connect and go look for additional resources and reach out to folks all across the university to see who I can bring in as an advisor, or someone who can help support this project or be a champion for it. Having folks who kind of can utilize and kind of thinking about how you can make the most of people's kind of preferences for teamwork and natural strengths towards not just the task, but the teamwork is a really important part of this. And again, this doesn't have to just be your thinking about just your PI, COI, kind of your top level investigators on a team, because a lot of times you may have a much bigger team of folks who are going to be involved, and kind of even just thinking about how they're going to work across different disciplines, bounds, aspects of the project, that's an important component too. So I think that there's a little bit of kind of planning and thinking about kind of, okay, what are our strengths from a teamwork perspective with the team I have now? What am I missing? And being able to more clearly identify what you're missing will also be able to make it a little bit easier, I think, to then reach out to the research office and maybe see if there are some available faculty or folks that might be able to join in and support your team. So in this case, it's thinking about the actual composition and thinking about your research project and your proposal teams and things like that a little bit more strategically sometimes, and or thinking about it. We've got the funding, we've got the grant, and now we got to get started. And so, how are we going to make sure that we've got the right mix of we're recruiting the right set of graduate research assistants, or we're getting the best possible postdoc on board to support this project. That type of thinking a little bit strategically and doing some documentation just to think about, okay, where are our strengths, where might we need to pursue additional support, will help, I think, curtail some of the issues that may come up later on in terms of conflict issues or needing to do more role clarity or things like that. So and so one other thing, one other kind of compositional related consideration to think about is sometimes we want to say, okay, well, let's either get lots of people on board or money's tight. Let's not get, let's just do exactly what we need to get. And so there's always kind of the struggle, and folks have asked me this before, and it's, what's the perfect team size? And the answer is really just, it's the size of the team where everyone has a role and a meaningful contribution that they can make to the team. Because if you start just pulling in people to pull them in because you might need them, or if you want to maybe keep things a little bit tighter because you're not sure yet, then you have to think about, am I either overtaxing the people who are, maybe we don't have enough people to meet all the actual roles, or maybe we have the wrong people, or is it that we have way more people on this than we actually need, and now there's not a clear role for everybody, and now there's the potential to create conflict or some competition or things like that for resources, and just confusion over who's supposed to be doing what on the project. So we tend to think too that the bigger that we have the team, then we kind of can forget how long it's actually going to take us to do something, because we think, oh, we've got all these people that can do it, and so that doesn't always equal the same, because if you're not having everybody contributing to in meaningful ways to the right roles, then things won't get done. We may have a great tons of undergrads to help do things, but if we need to do advanced statistics that they are not able to do, then that manpower will not help us in the end with achieving our goals. And something else I wanted to mention briefly here is just thinking about thinking a little bit about the diversity aspect. So I think especially what I want to focus on for this to some degree is thinking about like the disciplinary diversity. So again, I mentioned, we kind of talked before about how you've got a lot of different agencies and funding sources, NSF and others, that are really looking for us to kind of bring together different perspectives, different opinions to kind of push a little bit more on these limits and these different ways of thinking, and come up with new ways of thinking. And that type of kind of having that type of diversity is fantastic. There's also certainly a need to increase some of our social category diversities, and some of our making sure that we are kind of providing a good representation and incorporating different perspectives from different social backgrounds, experiences, and different values and different beliefs, to be able to make sure we're getting the kind of making the most of our research and also being able to kind of push forward new ideas and new perspectives. The problem though sometimes is that we tend to we tend to seek out folks that we're comfortable with and that we're familiar with, and often those are folks that are more like us. And so in terms of even just as a psychologist, if I want to work across disciplines, well, I can go very far into very different areas, or I could look at sociology or anthropology, and those are different, but they're not that they're not as probably diverse in their thinking than say if I'm working with somebody in engineering or computer science in terms of just our backgrounds and our areas of expertise. So since we want to kind of tend to go with that, okay, these are the folks I'm comfortable with, then some of what as a leader of research projects and things is that I would strongly encourage is just kind of try to think a little bit sometimes outside of that immediate bubble of who you know and maybe who you're most comfortable working with, because bringing in different perspectives may provide just a completely new approach. And this could be from it doesn't have to be always bringing in brand new different co-investigators in a project. It could be bringing in having creative inquiry team members who are from different majors than maybe you were expecting on a project. So and we've had that happen a few times where we've had some folks in very different areas and they've been able to really contribute some great input and provide some new perspectives that I think might not otherwise would have happened. So I think that we have to push ourselves a little bit outside of our comfort zones. I know that can be difficult sometimes when it's we've got this, we just found out about this grant proposal opportunity, and all of a sudden now we need to get it submitted. Let me just go with the folks I know and I'm comfortable with. That may work in some cases, but then but you may need to push a little bit more on that to kind of get a better end product out of this in the end. So a couple of things I also want to kind of talk about the composition components there. A few other things I wanted to just kind of bring up and think about. So let's say you've got your team, you're ready to go, you're starting to kind of put together as a PI, you've got maybe a proposal call, or maybe you've already even gotten the proposal, you've got the funding, and now it's time to really hit the road and get this project going. So some things that you need to think about, and again, this is kind of where the charter kind of comes in. These are all things that you would want to be laying out in your charter, and also kind of using a team charter as a way to do some socialization for, let's say, if you have new people coming into a project. But you want to make sure that you have very clear goals, very clear understanding of the objectives, that those goals are clear and specific and measurable, challenging, but not impossible. I know in doing research, sometimes they can often feel more impossible than we want them to, but kind of having that right level of difficulty is important. We also want to think about kind of as we set those goals up, that's going to shape then how we are bringing people into the team, because again, kind of thinking about who's going to be able to contribute, what they're going to bring in, whether that be from a knowledge, expertise perspective, or from a more of a teamwork, able to contribute to the team functioning overall perspective, balancing both of those two. And that will also contribute to our norms. So what are the ways that we are going to kind of operate and work together? And these can either be things that evolve over time, and we may have some that we lay out initially very clearly in our, for example, in our charter. But then maybe over time we either adapt them a little bit, or well, I don't have to tell you every time that this is the way to do this, because now we understand that this is the process. So there's some aspects of this that can be implicit or explicit. And so these are all things though to kind of be thinking about in terms of they have a big impact on how your team is going to function later on down the road. So I know sometimes it seems silly to talk about team goals, because of course we have goals. We're researchers. We're able to figure out what it is that we want to get done with the project. But sometimes it's more about having the thoughtful discussion of, okay, what are not just what's our big goal, what's our overarching, this is what we want to accomplish, and maybe even here are the hypotheses we want to test, or here's the study we want to do. But just talking a little bit more about okay, now what does that look like, not from a year-to-year or quarter-to-quarter perspective, but a day-to-day perspective. How is this going to work? How are we going to set up kind of more proximal goals and kind of documenting those out too, to make it clear that we are working towards this bigger overarching goal. And especially when we're talking about research teams, I think that often what we're really talking about is not just a single big team. We're talking about what we call a multi-team system, or a team of teams. And what we see happen is that if you work in these types of teams of teams or multi-team systems, where you might have different teams thinking that they're each kind of working on things that are contributing to the overall end goal, but maybe they're not coordinating enough, or kind of there's no plan to figure out, okay, how do we integrate what we're each working on? And then you get closer to the deadlines, you get closer to the end, and you don't have maybe an achievable end goal, because you haven't kind of set yourself up with some of these more smaller milestone markers along the way. And so if we just kind of jump in and don't kind of discuss our purpose, also if we're not discussing what it is that maybe we do have a great overarching, what's our team gonna get out of this, but I don't know as a co-investigator what I'm expected to get out of it from an individual publication perspective. And so being able to make sure too that, especially since those types of things can be very, very important to tenure promotion, laying out some of those, what are the expectations? What are my goals as a PI, a co-I, a postdoc, a research assistant on this? Laying those out for those some of those folks in terms of what's feasible within the project, and making sure that we're not setting ourselves up for failure, where everybody thinks they're going to get a single sole author paper out of the same data set. Those types of things are the more that those can be documented early on, the fewer conflicts and issues we're going to have later on. So something to be kind of in line with that. So as we're setting up our goals, we're kind of getting our team moving and grooving and going. Then we also want to think about, how are we bringing people into the team? And again, this is we bring them into the meetings. They start coming along to the stuff that we've been doing. We just have them jump right in and join in. And that can be sometimes where we especially as our team might grow and change, and people come in and they leave, especially for like bigger, longer term projects or centers or things like that. Then it's really important that we don't lose things when we're kind of lose out on integrating new members or when people are leaving, because if we're not kind of setting the right expectations for new folks as they come in, if they come in and they don't know what's going on, or kind of what their roles, goals, things are going to be, then we're going to set ourselves up for failure, quite honestly. And so kind of thinking about, again, kind of think about in your charter or whatever way you want to structure it, having some type of clear kind of idea around how are we going to bring someone new in. If it's a proposal and yesterday I was a co-investigator and now there's 10 other co-investigators that I'm going to be working with on this, then how are we all going to kind of figure out, get everybody up to speed? Who's going to be responsible for that? How are we going to make sure that That if I'm going to if I'm the postdoc and I'm going to be moving on to a new position, how I'm going to transition that over to to someone else. So kind of being able to adapt and kind of having some ideas around, and thinking about upfront, how are we going to make sure that people who are coming in or as they're leaving, we're not losing the rich knowledge and information that that they know about the project, and also we can quickly get someone else up to speed. Again, this is where the more that yes, it takes time to document, but the more that this type of kind of documentation and things can happen in a charter or other project documentation, the better, because then it's much easier to hand someone something and say, here, this tells you everything you need to know, not just the proposal, but this tells you how we are actually working together. Then it sets them up for kind of what they're expected to do, what they're expected to contribute, what is acceptable, kind of what might not be acceptable. And it will make this process a lot easier. It will make the potential turnover a lot lower on your teams too. So because it'll be easier to kind of bring someone in and make sure, oh yeah, this is a good fit before you get too far down the road. And all this kind of contributes to this kind of overarching bigger picture that kind of creating kind of a sense of not just I'm the social scientist on this research project, but I'm actually a member of this research team, and we're all working together. And it's that's where we're getting closer to that, being able to create a good convergent research setup. And one thing that I wanted to note was that leaders really play obviously a big role in this. So if you are the one who is leading the team, especially when it comes to things like creating team norms, since sometimes these can be picked up informally, then oftentimes we look to our leaders to figure out what's acceptable. So if I'm, joking around and very relaxed in a meeting and maybe giving lots of good, yes, we're getting work done, but we're also kind of having fun doing it, then you may feel more comfortable with kind of being able to jump in and maybe crack a joke too, or something similar. So and if I'm also willing to admit, oh wow, this was a mistake I made, I either apologize or let you know this is how I'm fixing it, so I'm going to make the situation better. Again, that's all kind of contributing to this norm of psychological safety. If I'm not shutting you down, in the meetings and saying, oh, well, you're just a student, you don't know what you're talking about. Those types of norms are really important to set correctly from the get-go, because if either as new people come in or just as you're kind of setting up the tone for this project and kind of setting up what things are going to be like, if you start to create this environment where you're not letting folks feel comfortable speaking up and contributing and sharing their ideas, then they will stop doing those things. And whether that's another PI or whether that's the students and other folks working on a project. So if you want to have kind of creating those, thinking about how you're intentionally thinking about how you're interacting in meetings and in other types of contexts is really important, especially like I said, kind of early on in the process to make it clear, it's okay if that you're admitting that something didn't go right or that you're not sure about something. It's much better to get clarification than it is to just assume. So these are all types of, again, little actions that build up over time. I think that's the thing I really want you to take away from this, is that those little actions will build up over time and create either very positive, supportive climates and a great research team, or they can really be detrimental to the end goals. And one place that this happens a lot can be in meetings, because that's where a lot of our kind of interactions and things happen. And so, and I'm sure that we are probably all zoomed out, meetinged out to some degree at this point, with all the moving to online for so many things, and now being able to schedule back-to-back meetings a lot more easily. Unfortunately, sometimes we think that we need a meeting for everything, and that becomes the norm. Is that, well, yes, let's meet about that. Let's talk about that. If that is your norm, please break that norm. If you have that norm in groups right now and teams right now, try to break that down, because if you think about who needs to be at the meeting, if you think about what it is, and if you cannot come up with a clear agenda, if you do not have a clear goals, outcomes, purpose for this meeting, you don't need a meeting. You may need to send some emails or have a phone call. You don't need a meeting. But if you do, then having some type of norms, I think, especially when you're talking about larger scale research projects, when you have these standing meetings every month or week or something, it can be very easy to say, oh, what are we, yes, we're all here, but what are we actually supposed to be doing? What's our goal? What's our purpose? So having someone who is dedicated to facilitating that meeting and making sure that it doesn't have to be the leader, it doesn't have to be you who's in charge of it. It could be someone else who's just, their goal is, their job is to keep track of time, make sure you're getting through your agenda, so that you have a very productive meeting in the end. You also kind of want to set up, make sure that, what are you going to do if the purpose of this meeting is to have a big discussion and reach some end goal? There may be some conflicts along the way. So just making sure that there's, thinking a little bit about, either anticipating what might, how that would potentially be handled, or having some opportunity for that is also an important component of, kind of depending on the purpose of the meeting and the goals of it. Having something afterwards that is a good, summary, following up, documenting, not just, okay, we've got a very long list of notes from the meeting that we just discussed, or we sat and we had great ideas and we had a wonderful discussion and no one took any notes and we don't remember what it was that we decided, who was going to be doing what. Again, putting a little bit of thought into, putting 5-10 minutes into planning your meeting beforehand may save you either from having to do that meeting, or will make it that much more productive and maybe save you from another meeting down the road, or having to repeat that meeting over again because you all forgot what it was that you're going to do. So again, kind of thinking about how there's lots of different types of norms and rules and things you can create. This is one area that I harp on a little bit because I think it's an important one where a lot of research teams can either really succeed well and make the most of those meetings, or they become the bane of your existence and you don't want to have to attend them. So that's something I think important to think about. So I think the last thing I'm going to kind of wrap up with here a little bit is just thinking about a little bit about conflicts. There, I mentioned a little bit there about the content a few minutes ago, or about conflict being an issue before. But the main point I want to make here is that, and I think Allison also talked about this a little early on, is that not all conflict is bad. I think sometimes we get in this tendency of either thinking that, oh, we shouldn't be disagreeing, or we shouldn't be, having this, having a big argument or something, or having, conflicting opinions or perspectives. Those conflicting opinions and perspectives may really be what's going to push us over to a new way of thinking, a more innovative idea, as long as it is focused around the task and around, not around making it personal, essentially. So we also have different types of approaches. So everyone may approach conflict different ways. And so these are just some different, actually, if you go onto the ITP Metrics website that Allison mentioned previously, there's some really great resources there in terms of different, some different survey tools and an actual feedback report for being able to understand a little bit more about your preferences, your team's preferences, and also give you some guides and things about how to kind of manage and deal with conflict in your groups. So what this chart just kind of highlights here is that there are different ways that we can kind of think about, when we're in a conflict or disagreement with others. There may be times where, quite frankly, avoiding the conflict may be an appropriate way to go, because if it's not going to help either side, either party, if it's not something that anybody, if it's more of a minor disagreement, minor issue, that's just not worth the political capital, not worth the time, the energy in discussing, then we may just want to avoid that conflict for now. I could bring it up, but I'm not going to, because it's just not worth it. If we avoid all the time, that gets us in trouble. That's where things then blow up later on the road. But there is a time and place for for smaller conflicts that are maybe less of a big deal. There's also times where we may want to accommodate others and be kind of accommodating, and that may be a case where we're having a disagreement, and I realize that, wait, I'm wrong and you're right, and so I will accommodate and go along with what you were saying, because guess what, it is the right thing to do. So I'm not compromising or taking one of these other approaches, because I'm saying that, yes, I recognize that my perspective might not be the best way to do this or the best way to go. And that helps also to kind of have a little bit of that give and take to help support each other. So the other, the dominating option, again, there's a time and place for it. So you don't always, dominating means that you're kind of really pushing for your views, your perspectives, and not everyone may want to take that approach. That may seem really strong, but if you know that you were right and you have the right information, you don't have to be rude in taking a dominating approach. It's that you can be consistent and you can be persistent in your kind of pushing towards a solution to the conflict that is in line with your perspectives, beliefs, knowledge, information. Again, time and place. So if it is a very sensitive issue and you are the expert and you have the right information, then that's when you want to use that. You don't want to be dominating all the time. For compromising and integrating, those are really about trying to figure out either, can we reach for integrating, kind of reaching a full, complete, yes, everybody's happy with this solution, this resolution to this conflict, and we're ready to move on from it because it's making us all happy, versus compromising where everybody's giving in a little bit, and so you're still reaching a kind of a mutually agreed upon solution. It's just kind of the degree to which are we giving in something, or are we fully all getting what we want? When you ask people about their preferred style for managing conflict, everybody tends to say the integrating option, because it sounds great. Being able to kind of, everybody gets what they want, it's great. That takes a lot of time and effort to do. So again, this is where you really have to think about, is it worth it? Is it something that is so important that we need to do this integration, or can we do some compromising? Can I accommodate, by listening to your perspectives? Do I need to take a more dominating approach? Are any of these wrong ways to do conflict? Potentially, if it's the wrong situation, but they can all be right ways to handle conflict, right ways to manage that conflict, depending on the situation. And this is the important thing, I think, to kind of point out here, is that you may have a tendency to prefer one of these over the other, to naturally go to one, but there is a time and place, and as long as you're kind of balancing out and thinking about the situations, any of these approaches can be useful. It's really just about kind of working through that. So doing things like, before the conflict happens, before you even get close to coming into a conflict with a group, again, having your team charter, maybe laying out what are we going to do if we have disagreements? How are we going to handle it? Are we going to do some type of recognizing kind of, okay, these are places where we might run into problems or disagreements later on. So let's kind of have that in mind, and maybe we have a more neutral party available to help us work through a particular discussion issue, reach a certain decision. Being able to, again, creating that environment of, do I feel comfortable speaking up, and can I encourage others that that if I think maybe things aren't quite right, getting folks to kind of speak up and share that before it becomes a full-blown discussion as leaders, helping kind of facilitate some of those types of discussions, or looking for someone else who can as a more neutral party. When you're having the conflict, focus on the task, focus on the shared interest, focus on the problem, not the people, because that's where we can do a better job of getting more kind of a more objective, a more rational outcome. Again, this is not always the best thing to do or try to do in the heat of the moment of things. If it is a really intense conflict or discussion, then that's where it's about maybe doing some of that avoiding for a little bit to let things calm down a bit and move on, so that an appropriate decision is made and it's not based on more maybe personality based conflict. And when we have, I think this is something that is not always folks are not always a fan of doing, but it's really important. It can be maybe uncomfortable to do a little bit, but doing some type of debrief and thinking back about, okay, now we did that, we got through it. Why did it happen? What was, and there may be times where you're having disagreements, especially around tasks and things. You can have it a very professional and polite way, and you handled it well. And maybe it's good to even just do that kind of like quick reflection on, oh wow, yeah, we didn't agree, we worked through it, and these are the things that helped us make sure that worked out well. Those are the types of opportunities that it doesn't take long to do, but to have kind of a quick debrief, a quick moment to reflect and think about, okay, either that was a really rough conflict, we don't want it to happen again, or that was managed really well. How do we make sure that that's our approach moving forward? These are the types of things that, again, if we want to keep our team productive, if we want to keep our team kind of being able to continue to work together effectively and move forward, thinking about and managing some of these maybe a little bit more messy areas of teamwork can be really important, even though I think that they may be maybe not always in our comfort zone, not things we always want to do. And so, but again, the more that we can kind of document and use things and use ways to kind of get this all together and in one place, using the charter is like kind of one great way to do that. And I think that's actually where we're going to kind of wrap up here. Is that I think we're at a good spot here to just kind of have everybody kind of reflect back a little bit. If there's anything that you have heard today, or any questions that you all have, if, like I said, if nothing else, then I've got the link here for the team charter template that you can have. Allison also shared that document, and I have would love to talk with anyone further about anything we can do to help out. As you can probably guess, this is an area very near and dear to my heart, and I can talk about it for hours and hours and hours on end. But I also very much, am interested in hearing if there are some specific concerns or questions or things that we may be able to spend our last few minutes here kind of wrapping up and discussing. So thank you everyone so much for listening. We really appreciate it, and happy to share all the slides, materials, and things with folks as needed.
Thanks so much,
Thank
Marissa. We'll take any questions anyone has now. You're welcome to pop those in the chat or unmute yourself to ask out loud.
Okay, I'll start. In my role as Associate Vice President for Research Development, I and Mariah and Jane and Kelly work with individuals across the university, and we see many teams that have come together and they haven't thought about these issues at all. Oftentimes it seems that they sometimes reach out to their friends at other universities when they're thinking about, forming a team to go after a bigger initiative. And I'm just curious how you would encourage, faculty across the university to think more proactively about this, particularly senior faculty who have kind of done it their own way most of their careers.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's always kind of, one of those, tricky things. But I think, especially having, I think sometimes too, it's even just having knowledge about and kind of that understanding, awareness. So utilizing, don't just go start with your friends. Maybe go to Faculty Insight, go to the department pages and see who is at Clemson. And if you kind of start to create that, okay, I love working with this person. Let me check and see if there's anybody at Clemson first, though, who does this. And I think that might be a good way to even just kind of start to think about who else is out there. I think also attending, encouraging folks to attend events like the Spark event and other things, the research symposium and things that are happening at the university level. Again, I know that folks might be limited on time, and sometimes the tendency, I think, is to go to those things when I have, it's like I'm presenting something, or I have a role in it. But I think that encouraging faculty to attend, and get involved in those types of things can really be helpful for just making that connection of, oh, now I know someone who does do that stuff at Clemson. And so I think that pushing faculty to think outside their box, kind of their boxes a little bit, might be, that's, I think, kind of outside that comfort zone. Maybe kind of one way to start that, and then maybe also is kind of getting that mindset in place of let me look at Clemson first and see kind of what's available. Sometimes I think that some it may feel a little bit harder to even know exactly, because there may be a lot of, I know there's always new folks coming in and folks leaving. And so even just being able to have as much or kind of encouraging folks as much as possible to, even if you don't have maybe a specific grant you're going for right this second, but you're starting to look for some, you're starting to think about maybe wanting to collaborate with somebody in a different area, then starting to make it more of a norm to go to the research office and see who's available outside of just, this is, I have a specific proposal I need to go get right now. More of those types of, and I think it's great that it seems like there's a lot more of those types of events that are coming up that that'll be really helpful for that exact thing.
Marissa, I see a lot of faculty teams that have, maybe the PI is super dominant, and when the other people don't perform as expected,
Mm-hmm.
they get they basically like disconnect from the group.
Mm-hmm.
And just if they don't like a paragraph or a section that somebody wrote, who's to be contributing, then they take it over and rewrite it themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes without telling the person who wrote it in the first place. And this leads to this, death spiral.
Yeah.
So, with teams that are like supremely dysfunctional like that, do you feel that setting forth a charter at the beginning would really help them? Or are they like doomed from the start because of the ingrained personalities?
I think that it can't make it any worse. And it may, but I think it may also make folks kind of think, we need to document this out, because in that way, at least I either know what to expect. So I know that there's a chance that, yes, I may work on this and it may get, knocked out or left on the road. And how do I feel about that as a team member? And is that something I'm okay with as a collaborator? And two, I think sometimes it's also thinking about the, I'm not sure how this would work from like an organizational, like an organizational culture type perspective. But if there's anything that could be done for I'm not sure what types of rewards or things could be put in place. That's something that we talk about with charters, though, is if you are doing the things that are supporting and for the greater good of the team, that there's here's kind of the benefits of what you're going to get out of it, versus if you're not doing those things, then what are the repercussions? So if you're cutting out everything I'm doing, then does that mean you're just going to start taking, do I still get all my, what I'm expected to get out of this without being penalized, essentially? Or is it just that, now you're going to cut me out of the project completely? So, and so even just kind of knowing those expectations going in, it may affect some of the future collaborations for that person. That may also be, it may be something that they need to be more outwardly recognized, so that they realize the impact it has, not just on that one person that they thought wasn't a great writer. But it's not that one person wasn't a great writer. It's that you've now decided that 10 of the people that you work with are not great writers. And so, is it really still them, or is maybe it's something about the way that you're handling the situation that you need to. Yeah. And I know exactly the type of situation you're talking about too, and that's what's and so that's why I'm also kind of thinking about in hindsight. Yeah.
Because they want the credit for having contributed to a successful proposal, and they'd also like to still remain on that team and get, if they're getting part of their salaries taken care of or whatever. So it I've seen some really, really like nasty messes with that. Where there was one where a co-PI was the one who was truly dominant, and she got the PI kicked off 2 days before the proposal was due.
So are there any other rules or things that can be put in place today? Yes, at a higher level then, because that seems like that may also be part of if there's if that's okay with you or accepted, and and then if that proposal gets funded, then does that is that, I don't know, that's also, I think, part of the thinking about like the conditions under which people are working and and working and kind of setting it up. So if we're setting things up, and this is a bigger issue I know too, just in general for research teams, it's like, if we're setting it up to for a PI to get all the rewards, but really it's all the hard work of everyone else, then then that's more of an an organizational structural reward system issue that needs to be corrected, and or has to acknowledge that is what is happening. And I think sometimes it may also be, though, that if we are the more things are documented, then that also helps to say it's not just that I'm making this up, that I think that they replaced my writing and my writing was amazing and awesome, when really was I did the bare minimum and shouldn't be getting any credit, because they did have to work maybe that much harder on something. But kind of having that having things documented out too, I think is something that also helps with things like that, to be able to show like this is what we actually contributed, and then reinforcing like when those percentages or conflicts or things come up, like, did you actually earn this percentage, or are there others who were maybe not contributing as much and getting more than they should be, or vice versa, I think.
Well, I mean, I think a lot of it comes as a time management thing. When you see the hours ticking away before something is due and someone isn't contributing, if you're the PI, you're likely to just take matters into your own hands and write the darn thing so they can.
And I think that's part of the but I think like if that's if that's also kind of laid out, it's like, this is these are my hard and fast deadlines as PI, and if those are not happening, then this is what will happen. Like those types of repercussions are being laid out, and whether that's can't meet this deadline because of something else that is going on, then and that's okay, and that's the way that things are going to have to go for this one. But I think that's when making sure those conversations happen too. I think that's also part of this, like actually even just making them happen, because I think sometimes it's I think I know what's going on, but I don't actually know what's going on, and then things
Yeah.
look different. Yeah. Transparency, I think, is a big part of the school process and the teams. And so
Well, if there are no more questions, we will thank our presenters, Dr. Scheffler and Dr. Traylor. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Allison and Marissa. It was great. And lots of valuable information, and we really appreciate it.